Welcome back to Rich Dad StockCast. I'm your host, Denney, and today we're talking about one of the greatest financial minds of all time. That's Charlie Munger. Now, while Warren Buffett often got the spotlight, many people believe Charlie Munger was the deeper thinker behind some of Berkshire Hathaway's greatest ideas. And Munger didn't just understand investing, he understood human behavior, decision making, discipline, and how wealth is really built over time. And today, Rich Dad expert Andy Tanner is joining me to break down what Charlie Munger understood about wealth that most people completely miss. Before we do that, speaking of wisdom, stockcastbonus.com, great resources there. What do our listeners receive when they go there?
You know, that's the site that we point people to when they're wanting to get their hands dirty and their feet moving. And so when we do the podcast, that's one of the main promos we do on a weekly basis. We change it from time to time what's there, but there's always free stuff there. As of this recording, we've got great download audiobook or ebook. Pick it up. Really, first of all, these things are free. And then second of all, they help get you organized, get you moving, so you can balance your consumption of content and say, oh, that's neat, and start doing stuff with the content where I say, hey, I'm going to do this, and you actually get it done. Because it's the action that makes the money. It starts with saying, hey, this is a good idea, but it actually, good ideas feel good to contemplate about. That's why people love to scroll. It feels good to have ideas, but it doesn't get much done. So if you want to get some stuff done, go there and let's start working together and let's get some stuff done.
All right, love it. Get some stuff done. Now, let's focus on good old Charlie Munger. What made Charlie different from the average investor or even the average wealthy person?
One of the things that Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger share, and this is my opinion, is they not only are brilliant, but they have an investor temperament, is what I would call it. Is they approach life with a different type of control over emotions than maybe they're not only smarter than the average bear, they control their emotions better. And just before I go down that a little further, a little note about my feelings about him generally. There's been people in my life, we all lose people that we know, you look at your parents, and I often say this, when a person loses a parent, there's not an event that is more universal in planet Earth. Everyone loses their parents one way or another. And yet, when it happens to you, it feels like the most unique passing, right? Someone close to you. So everyone loses their parents, but it's a unique experience when that happens. Well, in my life, as I've looked at some of the mentors who have passed away, some of them hit me harder than I thought. When my basketball coach, Rick Majerus, passed away, he had players a lot closer to him than me, like Keith Van Horn. He was godson to Keith's kids, right? Or godfather to Keith's kids, because Keith lost his dad, and Coach Majerus became like a father figure. And so when he passed, I caught myself shedding tears. I thought, well, gee, I knew I'd be sad, but my gosh. And part of it because I love my coach and he shaped my life. And the other part was this unimaginable, indescribable, comprehensive encyclopedia of basketball knowledge was now closed forever. We couldn't open that book again. That's how I felt when Charlie Munger passed, and it's how I will likely feel when Warren Buffett, when it's his turn. Charlie was just phenomenal, and it's that temperament that they often talk about that I think is as important as their ability to evaluate a company. Warren Buffett calls it the vicissitudes of the market, the ups and downs and the panics and the emotions and the gambling and all of the human foibles that are a default setting to most of us, automatic processes of fear and greed and panic and action and all that. Charlie Munger just had an ability to sit there and eat See's candies and not care. He knew what was up, and he just sat there and eat See's candies and drink Coke and not worry about this ups and downs. And he certainly had the gift of not caring of what anybody thought of him. I mean, he would state his opinion readily. So he was, I would say that's the long answer to your question is, I would say of a long list of things, beyond the brilliance, I say temperament takes the cake on that, is the next important, aside from his brilliance, temperament. And I have to work on my temperament.
What would you say, as you've studied Warren Buffett and studied Charlie, what's the difference between the two?
Well, I think that'd be better for Buffett to answer than me. Certainly their personalities are different, but I don't think they've had an argument. Charlie talks about this. And one time the reporter said, if you and Warren ever had an argument, do you have arguments? Do you hash it out? And, in particular Charlie fashion, I probably can't quote it right, but he'd say something like this. He'd say, you know what? We're aligned on most things. And if there's a little thing, what the hell do I care? That's kind of the way you say, it's that temperament. It's like, what do I care? It's not worth fighting over. And they had, I wouldn't even say disagreements. I think they'd have difference of view, not even opinion, just a difference of view, and they would come together. I'll give you an example of where I think Charlie had the biggest influence on Buffett in terms of investing. Is we talked about this in the previous podcast, I think, but it's bears repeating. Is Warren Buffett would look at cigars that he thought he had a couple more puffs left, and you'd look at a company that's kind of on its last leg almost. Now that doesn't sound like Buffett. That doesn't sound like a moat to me. It doesn't sound like a company that's going to be around for 50 years. A cigar butt that has two puffs left. I mean, what? That doesn't sound Buffett-esque at all, does it? But Buffett would say, well, it's cheap because they're in trouble, but maybe they got a little run left in them before they die. That last effort, that last before you fall, and he'd make a little money out of that. And Munger came to him. He says, look, this is cute and you're making money, but we're never going to get big. We're never going to compound well over time if we're just picking up the next cigar butt and then it dies, and we sell it before it dies. And I think we could credit, Buffett said this, but I think we can credit to Munger where he says, look, it's a lot better to buy a really good company at a fair price than just a fair company at a really good price. And that's when they started buying things with moats. And they started buying things saying, in our list of attractiveness, what companies do we really think have some staying power that we can stick with for a longer term instead of picking up the last cigarette butt? And I think that's probably the biggest thing that Munger brought to their partnership in terms of the change in how Warren Buffett approached things, which, made sense because that's more in line with what Benjamin Graham would have taught.
I see. Now, going along the lines of that, what did Charlie understand about avoiding, and I like the way he phrases things. He's very blunt in his words, avoiding stupidity instead of chasing brilliance. Why is avoiding big mistakes often more important than making huge wins?
Well, he actually talked a lot about what you just said. Is he would study. I don't want to misquote him here, but reporters would interview him, often at Warren's side, with the two of them together, and he'd say, "Look, I study what goes wrong with people, and I have this exact." I'm glad you brought this up because I have this exact philosophy. I just explain it in a different way when I teach. So let me put it this way. And I'll invoke some Robert Kiyosaki. So I hope this isn't too long-winded, but I think the payoff, I think the juice is worth the squeeze when we get this all squozen out here. In 2005 or 6, somewhere around in there, so this is 20 years ago, I had my first event with Robert Kiyosaki, first one. It was called The Psychology of Winning. And the very first lesson I remember him giving me personally, not in the book Rich Dad Poor Dad or Cash Flow Quadrant or Rich Dad Guide to Investing or any of the others, where he was on stage and he had a easel and he wrote things. And he wrote down the root word of education, a root word, educe, E-D-U-D-E, I think it was, educe. And he said, that means you pull something out, not put something in. And he said something, I'll paraphrase, that, school is about, I'm a professor, I'm going to take my knowledge and put it into your head. That's not a deuce. A deuce means you're going to draw it forth. So there's something inside of us. There's a neurosurgeon inside of me that never made it out. I hit organic chemistry and, that was all over, right? There's a pianist inside me that sort of is coming out still. There's a drummer inside me that kind of came out. The comedian's trying to come out and failing constantly. But there's an airline pilot inside of me, and there's all types of roles that are potentially mine inside, and it's just which ones get drawn out, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you think of your life, you could have been anything, and what got drawn out is who you are. Wasn't what was put in; it was what potential was drawn out. Well, Michelangelo is rumored, it's probably apocryphal, but he was rumored to have said, well, I saw the angel in the marble, and I just set him free. I just cut away the stuff that wasn't an angel, and I didn't really carve the angel. I just took what wasn't the angel away. So when I teach investors, I start off in this way. I'll say, look, I'm not Bon Jovi, but in my travels with Robert, I've seen a million faces, and I watched Robert rock them all, not me. But I've seen a million faces, and not all million people became millionaires. So when I look at that, I says, well, they all have the same information. I taught my kids this in Argentina when we were with Robert, when they were young. I said, now, how many of those people we spoke today are going to go out and be millionaires? You think all of them? They said, well, no. And I said, well, they all got the same information. And I said, it's what's causing them to fail that we should focus on, because all of them were given what they needed to succeed. And I said, the number one thing that stops an investor from coming out of the marble is when they decide to quit. That's number one. Quitting is not part of the investor process. The second thing is deprioritization of your own goals, where they become subordinate to someone else. In other words, what is urgent sucks you away from what's important. And instead of going to class or going to mentor club or reading Rich Dad Poor Dad or playing the cash flow game, something else comes that seems more urgent, even though it's less important, like having a job. Well, it's more important that I get a paycheck and pay my bills today. No, it isn't. It's more important that you learn those things so you don't have to have that paycheck anymore. So you have emancipation from it. So I have a list of things that when I teach students, I say, okay, this is the marble we're going to cut away. Well, Munger, coming full circle, hope the juice is worth the squeeze here. Munger would say, I study failure, and I find the criteria for failure and the causations and the coexistence and the coincidences. And I study failure in such a way that I say, okay, I'm not doing that, right? It's like the screw tape letters from C.S. Lewis, right? If I were the devil, how would I think about this? How would I keep someone from going to heaven? And if you take that screw tape letter, that mirror image, that antagonist image, well, maybe it's not what I'm supposed to do. It's what it's the sins of omission or sins of commission, right? So Munger would say, I'm going to study why people fail and say, okay, I'm not going to do that. So I do the same thing. Why doesn't the investor come out? Well, they quit. So that's off the table. I ain't quitting. Not me. Not an option, right? Never give up, right? Never, ever give up. Second, prioritization. Well, I got this thing over here pulling me away. No, I'm going to write my covered calls. I'm going to get my cash flow. I'm going to have my weekly meeting with my wife, right? And that's where the failure comes, is when stuff encroaches over that's urgent and takes the place of stuff that's important. So Munger was brilliant that way, in that he would probably look less at success. And he says, if I eliminate the failure problems, success is probably the natural order of things. It's probably normal to be successful if I can get the failure stuff out. I think that was great stuff. So I probably butchered that. I wish that's why we're sad he's not with us, because he can say that stuff better than I can. So I just do my best.
No, I love how you landed the plane there, and I would say personally, for me, I think the biggest topic that I learned from him was, and again I'll butcher it, but just using one word from his phrasing is inverse. Whatever it was, I inverted it. So
Yeah.
if whatever the failure was,
Well
do the
said.
opposite of it. Just do
See,
the
we should
opposite.
have had you answer that. I gave that big long soliloquy and Robert and Induce and marbles and Michelangelo, and you said, yeah, he just looked at the inverse. Well, there you go. Could have saved
There
us
you go.
20 minutes.
Very good. Well, let's do this. Let's take a quick break. Let's talk about the inverse here in just a moment. As we understand, Charlie Munger, he understood something most investors never fully grasp, and wealth is often less about complexity and more about just discipline. So when we come back, Andy's going to break down how investors can apply Munger's principles in today's world and why his thinking matters now more than ever. And don't forget to go to stockcastbonus.com, download your free resources. That's where you start building real wealth and real investing intelligence. Stick around. We'll be right back.
So far, it's been great. I needed a source where I could really enrich my education through stocks. I didn't really have an avenue for it, and it's helped me a lot. The simplicity has really gotten me on the track to where I enjoy the learning as well as it's really solidifying in my mind. And like, they're not just trying to sell you something, they really care about the people that are in the course, and they really do care about you and your personal goals, and what you want to do is to help you and your family and whatever your goals are in life through that. So it's really been great.
All right, welcome back to Rich Dad StockCast. Andy, let's talk application now. If someone wants to not do the failure stuff, what habits or principles should they start adopting immediately then? So if we're not quitting, what are we doing?
I don't know if this is good advice or not. I try this, and sometimes it works for me, and sometimes I fail. But I love taking guys like Munger and the Pope and Yoda and Superman or the devil or whatever. And when I'm perplexed and I hit a roadblock, I'll often say, well, how would Superman solve this? Or I'll say, well, how would Yoda go about this? Or I'll say, how would the devil go about this? Or how would Jesus go about this? That what would Jesus do stuff. Munger's a great one. What would Munger say about this? And as you track into that, and you see what he would do, it almost lays out the path of, okay, well, this is how I should do it, right? And there's something about that neurologically that you tap into someone's brilliance by simply saying, well, if I handed him this problem, how would he likely solve it? Munger would say, well, let's see, like we just talked about in the last segment, he'd say, well, let's take away the failures. And so then I superimpose that in my life and say, all right, well, what are the things that are stopping me? Am I deprioritizing? Am I quitting? How are my emotions? And then you emulate as best you can. There was this big, I have this friend who's a very famous hypnotist, on Letterman and all that stuff. And he had a name for this, and I'm going to probably butcher it, but I think he called it psychoneuroduplication, where you take a person's psyche and their neurology and you try to duplicate it in your own life, which is a fancy word for saying, go copy that dude. And if I start to act like that person and I start to copy that person, all of a sudden I look around like, wow, I've kind of duplicated that. My neurology is changing. My neuroplasticity is changing and becoming like that person, right? I'm duplicating that person. And so I don't take on everyone's traits. I still have my own personality and my warped sense of humor. I don't know how that changes. But I think that's one way to take a guy like Buffett and a guy like Munger or Jim Simon or whatever trading you want to do. You go read Jack Schwager's book and look at all the turtle traders or whoever, and you start duplicating how they think. And I think that's a great step is to say, all right, well, I'm going to copy him. Pretty simple. How do you implement what Munger does? Well, start acting like he does. Now, I don't know that I could talk like he does because he's a little more crass. But, don't you love Munger just like he doesn't care? And, there's that, that subtle art of not caring about stuff. I think that's a similar title, the subtle art of not caring about things.
Yeah.
I think Munger, like I said, he eats the seas candies. Like you remember the Bitcoin thing? Like they don't like Bitcoin. Now, that doesn't mean you don't get to like Bitcoin. It's just not their preference. I mean, there's certain types of music I just don't like, right? Might be great music. But if you ask Buffett about Bitcoin, this is what he'll say. Well, if you gave me, 20% of the farmland and said it was going to be this X billions of dollars, I'd write you a check because it'd produce something. I'd have something that would produce a crop. And he said, if you gave me, X percentage of all the real estate, I'd write you a check because I could rent it and it'd create something. But if you gave me all the Bitcoin, I wouldn't give you a dime for it because if I had it all, well, number one, it would produce anything. Someone would have to buy it for me. And if I had it all, then there'd be no confidence in it anyway, right? And so that's Warren Buffett on Bitcoin. He says, now what do you think, Charlie? And Charlie just say this. He goes, Bitcoin's a turd. And Buffett's like, we're having a meeting. Buffett's like, this is our shareholder meeting, And Munger's sitting there eating cheesecake. He's like, I don't care. That's what I think. And it's just endearing, just that he did not, this guy didn't care. I guess when you got that kind of coin, who cares? You can say what you want and, who cares? So I love that about Munger. Wit, wisdom, and just very blunt.
He did not
Buffett
care.
loved it. Yeah, and it's almost like Buffett looks over, and is like, man, I wish I could have said that, but I'm Warren Buffett. I can't say that, but you can. Like, Charlie, really? That's so good.
They made such a good 1-2 punch, and I got to luckily. I mean, I would say it's such a highlight, of my lifetime. I got to go to a Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting, see both of them. I was 11 rows away. Got to see Warren
awesome.
and Charlie and talk for I don't know how long it was, 6 hours, 8 hours, whatever it was. But there was one moment where Charlie fell asleep in the middle of it on stage, and that was the I don't give a what.
Yeah, that's happened more than once.
Yeah.
I have I don't know how much time we have, but I have 3 quotes, and they're huge on my wall. And when I look at with the way I'm not a neurotypical thinker, meaning that I'm disabled. I don't think, time blind.
Neurodivergent, ADHD.
My executive functions aren't the best. So what I have to do in my life is like I was talking about Marcy, I go, if I don't set my external cues, a day will go by and I don't know where the time went. I have to have cues to remind me externally of what's happening with time. So I surround myself rather with paintings of, mountains or paintings of the beach or whatever. I surround myself with external cues to keep my mind on so it doesn't go all over. And I have 3. I have one from Steve Jobs, I have one from Warren Buffett, and I have one from Charlie Munger. And those are the 3 biggest pieces of artwork that I have in my office. I mean, the one of Jobs is 6 feet wide and 4 feet high. I mean, they're big quotes in my wall. And the one about Munger that I just love talks about being a business owner and not just being shrewd. And he says, if you're just successful and, you grow rich by buying little pieces of paper, that's a failed life. Success is more than wealth accumulation. And when you go to that Berkshire meeting, you'll notice the pride they have in their brands. I mean, they're not just selling their wares. They can sell their wares, but they have those See's candies on the stage, and that Coca-Cola on the stage, and Heinz ketchup's all over the place. And they are very, very proud of Dairy Queen Blizzards and Duracell batteries and RC Willey furniture and Geico insurance, because they're like, we're making a difference in people's lives. And people forget about that. They think about Jeff Bezos, and he's got 17 houses, each with a swimming pool, and they go, well, no one needs that. Look what that dude did for us. Look at Jobs. How do you try to invent one iPad? That's one thing. Then build 300 million of them in less than a year to be distributed. What does it take to come up with one and then build 300 million of anything? And so these guys are forced to be wealthy because of what they give. and because of how they help, and because of the value that they offer. The work that's done on the cash flow Jack in the Box is where the moat is, because, they own Burlington Northern Santa Fe. That's, 40% of the North America's freight is rail, and they have the biggest rail. So if you want food to eat, they're going to put that on your plate. And if you want lumber to build, they're going to put that on the job site. If you want heat to keep you warm, they're going to put the coal in that railroad and get it to you. And so these guys have, our Buckminster Fuller had a generalized principle that Robert turned me on to called, the more people that I serve, the more effective I become. There is no way to reach more people so fast than to buy a share of Coca-Cola, because now you're selling 2 billion beverages a day. And you can't help but have that money pile up because you're serving so many people. And so when he says, this is not about shrewdness of just buying little pieces of paper, that's just a failed life. Owning a company you're proud of and doing work, or owning work, and guiding work and funding the work in initial public offering is funding to advance work, to bless the lives of more people. That's capitalism. Capitalism is when you have an inequality that they don't get. They think the inequality is, well, they got more money than me. The inequality lasts here. And I taught my kids this when they were 5 freaking years old. I said, here's the inequality. They've got 50 cents and you've got a glass of lemonade. And you've got to give them more than that 50 cents is worth, or they won't give it to you. And so you always have to give more than you receive. And my sons wouldn't have thought this that young, but an adult would say, well, if I'm always giving more than I receive, how can I ever make a profit? And the answer is synergy in the quality of work you do and serving more people to scale. The synergy is where the work is worth more than the sum of its parts by being assembled well. And so it makes it worth more than the 50 cents. So you're in the business of saying, how can I bless people's lives more than the 2 bits can somewhere else and earn that 25 cents? And Buffett and Munger especially, I think, I elaborate on that quote, but, if all you do, in life is become rich, that's a failed life. Life is more than being shrewd. If all you do is find success by buying little pieces of paper, that's a failed life. Life is much, much more than just wealth accumulation. It's serving other people. So Munger got it, man. I mean, that's a lot of ground, actually, inverse thinking, take away the failure, serving people is the way the wealth comes, not just getting the wealth. I mean, he's a stud, man. Great stuff.
Very much so. Now, I want to come full circle, and I always like to end with an action step, something that our people can do that are listening to this, and bringing up, duplicating, channeling someone else, copying how they think. If someone wanted to start developing that kind of thinking that Munger had, what's the first step they should take this week?
Well, I think we could just do a call back to copy him and start acting like he acts and do what he did. So one of the things that he and Buffett did every day is they learn. It's the most important activity of their day. Buffett was at Columbia with Gates talking to a bunch of their MBA students. And one of the MBA students asked a question, said, what's the most important thing you do every day? And both of them, absolutely without hesitation, said, learn. Buffett spends most of his time learning, reading, investigating, asking questions. He spends his life as a student more than a teacher. Robert is the same, does a lot more. I mean, you see that guy tear apart books, man. That dude is crazy. That book's going to be, it looks like it's been hit by a train, and, it's packed with notes and Post-its, and he just is insatiable. So the ability to buy a copy of the book Rich Dad Poor Dad and start reading, or buy a cash flow game and start learning, or better yet, start paper trading, is just say, what percentage of my day is dedicated to learning something? And you can do that by reading. You can do that. Now, I always say, as an author, I want to sell my books. So I'm going to say something like this to sell my books. I say, people who are interested in success, they read books. And if they're interested in success, they're going to read books. Now, people that are committed to success, though, they get mentors. There's a difference. You want to read about swimming? You're interested? Read about swimming. You want to win a gold medal? Better get a coach to really put you in the water. Because you don't learn everything from reading a book. You learn things by getting in the water and swimming. And that's how you learn to swim, by doing it, not by reading about it. So, yeah, StockCastBonus.com. Start reading, and then we can help you start doing. Imagine this. We have a mentor club every week where we do it. We, here's the stocks. We find them, boom, buy it. Sometimes we make money. Sometimes we lose money, and the whole thing. And we do it once a week where people can do a weekly trade and just follow along in their paper account to learn by doing. That Kona learning idea, simulate the real experience or do the real thing. Either trade some money or get a paper trade account and do it. Imagine where a person is at the end of a year, as opposed to if that year went by without learning. So how do you do what Munger did? Start saying a certain percentage of my day, every day, is going to be learning about wealth. Imagine that. A guy's 100 years old, darn near, and he gets up in the morning and says, well, I got to learn some stuff today.
I love that.
It's not what he has in hand. It's what I need to put more in the tank, man. It's crazy. You'd think at age 90, you'd say, yeah, I think I got a handle on this stuff. Nope, better read, better study, better interview, better practice.
After multiple billions, I got this, I'm good. Nope, still reading, still learning.
And that should be the crown, though. That should be the crown jewel, because to them it's just a game. Buffett's giving all his money away. He says it. Buffett's like, money has no utility to me. What am I going to do with all this? That's why he's giving it all away. His life was like, okay, how many people can I serve? That's going to give me a whole bunch of money. And at the end, I'll give this money back out to everybody. It was really a fun experiment to see how many people I could serve. But after a while, that's, the money I got, well, that's just too much, so I'll give that away too. You serve and get the wealth, then you give the wealth back to serve. Jiminy Christmas, what a lot. And capitalists are bad people, huh? Okay, well, I'll let someone argue that. And the best thing you could do with a guy like, like that Marin, the guy they got in New York or whatever, best thing you could do is just let that guy talk. Just let him talk. He's good at it. And the more he talks, the more you'll be like, okay, yeah, that's where that is. I'm a capitalist, man. Serve as many people as you can, get a pile of cash, and then give the money away. That's pretty good life, isn't it?
I think it's a fantastic life. Well, Andy, thank you so much. Listeners, Charlie Munger understood that wealth is built through thinking, through discipline, through patience, and avoiding unnecessary mistakes. And in a world obsessed with speed and hype and AI, and his principles may be more valuable today than ever. And again, big thank you to Andy Tanner for breaking this down for us. Now, if you want to become more disciplined and an intelligent investor, go to StockCastBonus.com. You'll find free tools and resources designed to help you to think smarter and invest with confidence. And if this episode gave you value, make sure you like it, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe, share it with someone who wants to think differently about wealth. You're not here by accident. You're building something that most people won't. So stay smart, stay invested, and we'll see you next time.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.